So when we created an object using val user1 equals user and we gave some values, what happened was first Kotlin created an object in the memory like this. It created an object somewhere, and obviously the it's going to create at a certain address in the memory, and it is then going to create a reference called user1, right? But this reference and this object, they're going to be in different parts of the memory. This reference user1 is going to be in an area of memory called the stack, and this object is going to be created in an area of the memory called the heap. So you see here how these reference and the actual object are going to be created in different area of the memory. So you see this is a heap object. Okay. So the reason for this is Kotlin has its own way of managing memory, and it is convenient to create objects like this in the heap and references in the stack. And so the reference here, user1, is going to contain the address for this object. It's not going to contain the actual object. It's only going to contain the address of this object. So we say that user1 here points to the actual object in the memory. So similarly, when we created an object called user2, and like this, we created an object, this address of the object was going to be inside this reference. Now, the next step, what we did was we created a reference called user3, and we said we assigned it to user1. So we said val user3 equals user1. Now what happens is it creates this reference user3, but since the reference is the same as user1, this one also points to the same object. So user3 now points to the same object. Going back to our code, now we understand why print user1 equals user2 is printing false. So we're comparing user1 with user2, and even though they have same values, it's printing false because the objects that they are pointing to are completely different. It is trying to check if it's the same reference, if it's the same address. So since user1 and user2 are pointing to different objects which are in different addresses, it returns false. Now let's check if user3, when I say user3 equals user1, it says true because the address of user3 and user1, the object that they are pointing to, is the same. So the address that user3 contains is going to be the same as the address that user1 contains. So it prints true. But there's a problem here. This is not what we want in our application. We want to compare the values. We want to know if both the users have the same ID, name, and age, and we should be able to compare these values. The reason for that is, so it compares the addresses because that's the default implementation of equals. So every time you say user1 double equals user2, when the when the compiler sees this double equals, it immediately calls the equals function inside the any class. There is a default implementation, it calls the equals function. So similar to toString. So when I said every time you call the println, it's going to call the toString function inside the any class. Similarly, if it sees double equals, it is going to call the equals function inside the any class. So just like we have overridden the toString function, we need to override the equals function if we want to give our own implementation. But IntelliJ gives you an easier way to override the equals function. You can right click anywhere in your class and say generate, and here you see that it has You can generate toString and equals and hash code. So you can IntelliJ will generate this. So if you don't want this toString implementation, if you won't want this default, so you can say generate, and here you can say toString, and it's going to ask you what are the values you want displayed. And if you select all three, it's going to give you an implementation for toString. And similarly, you can generate equals, and you here you'll see that it doesn't say equals, it also says hash code. The reason for that is equals, if two objects are equal, the hash code should also be equal. So let's go back to our any class. You see that it has a function called hash code, and it returns an integer. So if two objects are equal, their hash code has to be equal. And if two objects are equal, then equals method will return true, and the hash code also has to be equal. So let's see what happens. So let's go here. I'm going to right click, say generate equals and hash code, and say next. And you see that it is asking you what fields do I want to be included in equals. So I'm going to include all the three fields, and also it's going to ask you to choose the properties to be included in hash code. And when I say okay, then it's going to generate some implementation. So in this generated equals function, you see that it's checking every field, whether the age is equal to the age of the other object, id equals id, and name is equal to name. And so it's able to generate the equals, and hash code has to be the same for the same object. So it's going to compute a hash code using all the three, age, id, and name. It's able to compute a hash code. So if the objects are the same, then the value for the hash code will also be the same if computed this way. So it's very important to override hash code and make sure that both your objects return the same hash code. If you are going to override equals, you have to also override hash code. And if you don't, you're going to receive a lot of errors when you try to compare objects.